صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من اللعين الشيطان الغوي الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله وأفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين ورحمة الله للعالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المقتولين الميامين المهديين، ولا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين أرواحنا له الفداء. أما بعد، فقال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. جزاكم الله ألف خير. I want to begin tonight with a story, well, not a narration rather. Tonight's discussion is about sacrifice. The ayah that I began with from Surah Al-Ahzab, ayah 23, describes the nature of sacrifice. That some people, they give their sacrifice in this world, the other people that they're waiting. مَنْ يَنْتَذِرُوا وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. And there's no replacement for them. This is, of course, a reference to those that give their lives in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. And tonight, I want to honor two particular people. Actually, three particular people. Three sons. Two of them, the sons of Amir al-Mu'mineen, one the son of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. All three of them share this single attribute of this ayah. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ. All three of them share this. All of them completed their term in this world. All three of these men. The first, of course, is Abi Fadl Abbas. And I came across a beautiful riwayah about him the other day, and I just wanted to share it with you. Riwayah Latifa wa Jamila. It's this beautiful riwayah. Narrated by Alamat Zanjani. He was the Imam of the Salah of Jum'ah in Najaf al-Ashraf for many, many, many years. Sayyid Ibrahim al-Musawi Zanjani in Wasilatul Darain fi Ansar al-Hussein. هذا الكتاب مهم. And it's an authentic book. And it's introduced, the Muqaddamah is by Sayyid Muhammad Sadiq ala Bahr al-Ulum. What does Sayyid al-Bahr al-Ulum say about the book that I'm going to read from? Just so it's not that I'm bringing, from here and there things. وَمِنْ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ أَبْدَعُوا فِي ذَلِكَ صَدِيقُنَا زَنْجَانِ أَطَالَ اللَّهُ بَقَاءَهُ فَقَدْ أَلَفَ هَذَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِي بِأَيْدِينَا وَالَّذِي لَا يَأْتِيهِ الْبَاطِلُ min bayni tiyatihi. And he goes on to say, and the history in here is daqiq and it's excellent, an masadir wathiqa, and he goes on. So he says that this book is a very important book. And who has written this? Muhammad Sadiq ala Bahr al-Ulum, huwa min Fudala, a great scholar. He wrote this in 1394 Hijrah, Rabi' al-Thani, on the 14th of Rabi' al-Thani. So the riwayah, as narrated by Alama Zanjani in some early sources, such as the Asrar of Darbandi, نقلا عن بعض الكتب المقاتل, that is narrated in some of the books of مقاتل, أنه إذا كان يوم القيامة اشتد الأمر على الناس, that on the day of judgment the situation will be very severe for the people. Very اشتد الأمر على الناس. بعث رسول الله أمير المؤمنين إلى فاطمة. Then Amir al-Mu'mineen will be sent by Rasulullah to Sayyidah Zahra on the day of judgment. لِتَهْدَرَ مَقَامْ شَفَاعَةٍ, so that she will be in the place of giving intercession. فَيَقُولُ أمير المؤمنين يا فاطمة ما عندك من أسباب شفاعة. That, oh Fatima, what do you have from the reasons or the causes or the tools for giving shafa'a في يوم القيامة. انظر إلى هذه الكلمات. Look at these words. This is very important what the riwayah states. وما أدخ, and what have you prepared لأجل هذا اليوم الذي فيه الفزع الأكبر. فتقول فاطمة. Now Fatima says, يا أمير المؤمنين كفانا لأجل هذا المقام. Sufficient for us in this place of intercession is what? اليدان المقطوعتان من ابن العباس, من ابن al-Abbas, that the two hands, cut off hands of my son Abbas, salamullahi alayhi. Sayyidah Zahra will use the two hands of Abbas, salamullahi alayhi, as the tools and the asbab of shafa'a fi yawm al-qiyamah, inshallah. And what does she say? Ibni al-Abbas, my son Abbas. Subhanallah, what is the maqam of Abi Fadl Abbas, salamullahi alayhi? Bab al-Hawa'ij. رواية لطيفة جميلة جدا مؤثرة. In another riwayah, this is a story narrated من الثقات, he says, في هذا الزمان, that among the mu'mineen there was somebody who, among the mu'mineen and prominent people in Karbala, كان يزور الحسين في كل يوم, that he would visit Imam al-Hussein every day. وما كان يزور العباس إلا في الأسبوع مرة واحدة, except he would only visit Al-Abbas salamullahi alayhi one time in the week, but every day he would visit Abu Abdullah. So then it is narrated here that one night he went to sleep, and then he saw in his dream الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء salamullahi alayha. He saw Sayyidah Zahra in his dream. ويسلم عليها فأعرضت عنه. And she turned away from him. فقال بأبي أنت وأمي لأي تقصير تعرضين مني. For what taqsir are you turning away, doing ta'arid from me? For what? فقالت لإعراضك من زيارتك ibni, because you have not done the ziyarah of my son. He tells her, Ana azuru ibnak fi kulli yawm, I visit your son every day. قالت تزور ابني الحسين ولا تزور ابني العباس. But you don't visit my son Abbas every day. إلا قليلا. And then he says, I woke up and I contemplated over this, and I realized that day the true meaning of tawassul and the ziyarah to Abi Fadl Abbas salamullahi alayhi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to go again to Bab al-Hawa'ij inshallah, and to get the shafa'at of Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha, for she is not only the watcher over this majlis, but over all the visitors to Abi Fadl Abbas salamullahi alayhi, Bab al-Hawa'ij. So that is one person, because of the sacrifice, this immense sacrifice that he gave, those two arms that he gave for his master Imam al-Hussein. This is the maqam that he has arrived at. Now, the second person that we want to discuss now, we're going a little bit back to a previous discussion about Muhammad, the son of the first Khalifa. Has a very interesting life and a very important life, and I would say in some ways, subhanallah, he is madloom. Lesh. Why is he madloom? Maybe he's madloom in some ways, not that we have done dhulm, just in a unintentional way he is madloom, because we don't know too much about him. And tonight I think we're going to see something that is going to, for those who are not aware, are going to be like, wow, okay. And when we think of Abbas, we're not saying he's at the level of Abi Fadl Abbas, but you know, he's up there. He's someone who's very important. He's someone who definitely represents the verse that I just described. He was, of course, as I mentioned, the son of Asma bint Umays. He was about 5 years old when Amir al-Mu'mineen adopted him. Subhanallah, look, there was no shame in marrying widows with children, by the way. Huh? This is the first lesson for everybody and myself. Either men or women. We see in the history of Islam, even after the death of Fatima Zahra, who stepped in to take care of the children? Amir al-Mu'mineen had all these little children. He married immediately and women came. So there's many narrations like this. In this case, Asma bint Umays married Amir al-Mu'mineen. She already had a son. He was about 5 or 6 years old. His name was Muhammad. She was previously married to the first caliph, the first Khalifa. He raised Muhammad as his own son in his own lap. But of course, his biological connection was not to Amir al-Mu'mineen. But as we're going to see, Muhammad, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, becomes in the same rank, almost, we would say, as Kumail ibn Ziyad, as Malik al-Ashtar, as Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. He's in that daraja. He grew up with Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, salamullahi alayhima. He grew up with Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. These were the people that he was around throughout his childhood. Because remember, Amir al-Mu'mineen adopted him at the age of 5. So he was very small when he was adopted by Amir al-Mu'mineen. And immediately during the first fitna, when Amir al-Mu'mineen became Khalifa, there was already big problems in the Muslim community because of Muawiyah. Muawiyah did not accept the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Through this whole process, a lot of people suffered. Muawiyah, the Umayyad leader in Sham, was one of the most brilliant and trickerous and devilish politicians that ever existed in the Muslim world. And what you're about to see is how he can take words, spin them in such a way like a spider's web that at the end of it, if you're not very strong in your intelligence, you'll go. Muhammad, when he became the governor of Egypt, yes, before Malik al-Ashtar, Muhammad was the governor of Egypt. Amir al-Mu'mineen sent him to Misr to rule over Misr, which also shows how important of a person Muhammad was. Because Misr and Egypt was probably one of the most important posts of appointment and rulership in the entire Muslim world. And Muhammad was given this position in Egypt. Muhammad writes a letter to Muawiyah, sometime perhaps when he became governor or slightly before he became governor. Before I narrate I already narrated the other night rather what he said to him. He wasn't very polite, let's just put it like that. He basically says, Yani, you are La'in ibn La'in. You and your father never were true Muslims. You know, the fadl and the imamat of Amir al-Mu'mineen was always there. It was always clear. And you cannot compare yourself to him. We'd already discussed this. I think I see many common faces. People were here. Ala kulli hal. But the question is, where is this letter found? Because this is a turath of Islam. This letter is found in 2 very important historical sources. Source number 1 is Ansab al-Ashraf of Ahmad bin Yahya al-Baladuri. Ahmad bin Yahya al-Baladuri is among the most important historians after Tabari himself. He lived during the imamat of Imam al-Askari, Imam al-Hadi, Imam al-Askari, during this time. He served in the Abbasid court in Baghdad. He was a very important writer and historian, okay? And he compiled the history of Muslim rulers in this book. He was a student of Muhammad ibn Sa'ad. Also wrote a book called Tabaqat al-Kubra, which is considered to be one of the most important books of biography of the Ashab of Rasulullah for the other Muslim groups. He was a student of Ibn Sa'ad. So Al-Baladhuri is a very important source in Islam. I don't think anyone can come and say he is not important. Now you can argue, oh, maybe authentic, maybe not. But remember one thing. This was also a time where speaking about these sensitive issues was off limits. And Baladhuri served who? The Abbasid leader. The Abbasid leaders were anti-Shia and anti-Ali. So this would not serve their purpose. Baladhuri would have every motivation not to include this letter in his book. Yet he has included it. That is a sign to us of how important and ma'ruf it is. The fact that Baladhuri has included this risala in his history is very important. The second source, of course, is Waq'atu Siffin, written by Al-Minqari, who is one of the Shia scholars and historians who's written about the Battle of Siffin. So now, what happens? Muawiyah writes to Muhammad, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim min Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. You're going to see how Ziyarat Ashura and the words of Muawiyah come together. He writes to him, and he doesn't have good things to say. Let's just leave it at that. And he says to him that there's a few problems in your letter. First problem in your letter is what? Is that this is something لِرَأْيِكْ فِيهِ تَدْعِيفٌ لِأَبِيكَ. That in this letter there is some problems about the first Khalifa. Huh? What does this have to do with first Khalifa? This has nothing to do with them. Look, this is brilliant now. Devilishly brilliant. What Muawiyah does. So right away Muhammad's like, okay. فَقَدْ كُنَّا, we and the first one were together during the life fi hayat nabiyina wa nara haqqa ibn Abi Talib laziman lana. He says that we, Muawiyah saying that we were with the first one and we saw that the haqq of Ali laziman lana was incumbent and wajib upon us. Wa fadluhu mubarrazan alayna, and the virtues of Ali were so much that it outnumbered us. Mubarrazan alayna. Wait a second, who's saying this? Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Sometimes al-haq yajri ala lisan al-adu. Sometimes truth even comes from the enemy's tongue, even when they don't want it to. Then he goes on to say, but once Allah took the soul of the Prophet, what happened? He says, فَكَانَ الْأَوَّلُ وَفَارُوقَ, that the first one and his assistant, his Farouk, أَوَّلَ مَنْ ابْتَزَهُ وَخَالَفَهُ, they were the first one to snatch the haqq of Ali away. They were the first one to oppose him. عَلَى ذَلِكَ اتَّفَقَا وَاتَّسَقَا, and they were in agreement with each other to do this. Al-awwal wa thani. Wow. Who is saying this? Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. And it's narrated in a non-Shia historical book, Ansab al-Ashraf of Ahmad bin Yahya al-Baladhuri. ثُمَّ دَعَوَاهُ إِلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ, then they brought it and claimed it for themselves. فَأَبْتَأَ عَنْهُمَا وَتَلَكَّأَ عَلَيْهِمَا, and they kept it for themselves and made sure that it stayed with them. And then he says there was deep intention and planning. أَرَادَ بِهِ الْعَظِيمِ, وَسَلَّمَ لَهُمَا وَلَا يُشْرِكَانُهُ فِي أَمْرِهِمَا. That and nobody could share in their amr, fi amrihima. They made sure that they kept it for themselves and that no one would share. وَلَا يَتْلَعَانُهُ عَلَى سِرِّهِمَا حَتَّى قَبَضَ أو أَنْقَضَ أَمْرُهُمَا. Until one or the other would die, they would make sure that they keep this to themselves. Now I want to repeat, who is writing this letter? Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I think mu'mineen we don't need to explain what is being said here. Muawiyah is saying that if you are blaming me, you have to look to the past to understand the present. Meaning you cannot just look at Karbala in isolation, you have to look at the past to understand Karbala. Muawiyah is telling Muhammad, today you're complaining to me, but you need a history lesson. And then he says, when the second of them died, they passed it to ثالثهما, to the third of them. يهتدي بهداهما ويسير بسيرتهما. And he was guided by their guidance and followed in their seerah, in their path, in their precedent. Meaning the franchise training program was already in place. It's just about bringing in a new owner, right? It's like if you go to a Dunkin' Donuts, it's pretty standard, right? There's a certain quality of coffee, a certain way it should be done, there's donuts, whatever, the bagels. The franchise system is already in place. That's why he says, وَيُسِيرُ بِسِيرَتِهِمَا, right? Because precedent was already set for these things. So putting a third one was not hard. And we already spoke about the shura and how that all went down, right? There was a shura in order to appoint the third one, right? And of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the cards were decked, were stacked against him to begin with. And he knew this. But he had to be in the shura, so history would say that Amir al-Mu'mineen was there, he did participate in the process, yet they turned against him. Because then it becomes a hujjah. Otherwise, it wouldn't be necessarily, for people who would argue otherwise, a clear hujjah and evidence against them. Then he says, you and Ali neglected the third Khalifa. You thought that he would somehow be kicked out, or yani fihi al-aqasi min ahl al-ma'asi, that basically he would just be thrown out of his position. Anger and things got out of control. So basically he's telling Muhammad, take a dose of your own medicine. If you don't know things very well here, you might be thinking Muawiyah is a great guy. Like, look, he's just following the franchise. He's just putting his hand, I'm just following orders. You know how sometimes say, just the messenger. That's a cop-out. You're not just the messenger. If you're in a position of leadership, you can't just say you're just the messenger. You're more than just the messenger. Then he says, and the first one, mahada mihadahu wa bana mulkahu wa shadahu. Mahada mihadahu. And the first one paved his own way and he built his own kingdom. Wait a second. The word mahada, where do we read it? In which ziyarah? وَلَعْنَ اللَّهِ الْمُمَهِّدِينَ لَهُمْ بِالتَّمْكِينِ مِنْ كِتَالِكُمْ بَرِئْتُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَإِلَيْكُمْ مِنْهُمْ. How interesting is it that the words of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan can be found in some ways in Ziyarat Ashura. That, oh Allah, we make a dua, remove your mercy from those who paved the way to allow for to prepare and to allow for and empower the killing and murder and fighting of Ahlul Bayt. In what world would you think that the kalam of Muawiyah could be used and looked at with Ziyarat Ashura. This is a testament to the wisdom of Allah Azza wa Jal, that such letters would be found in the earliest sources of Islamic history. This is I'm not pulling this from Bihar al-Anwar. Baladuri lived in the 9th century. Not of Hijrah, of the Christian calendar. That would be about the 3rd century Hijrah. That's early. I'm not pulling from, this is not from Bihar al-Anwar, brothers. Not that there's anything wrong with Bihar al-Anwar, but my point is that I'm not taking from a 16th, 17th century source. This is from the earliest Turath of Muslim history. You can argue, okay, maybe it's Da'if, Hassan, whatever, you can argue, but you can't argue that it's not so important that someone like Baladuri would still include it in his book, despite the fact that by the time of Mutawakkil, it was very obvious that the Abbasids were, that the thesis of having 4 rightly guided caliphs, Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, was already cemented by the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. I don't want to go into too much of a history lesson here. That's something I teach in my undergraduate class. But the point is that this was a time in which you could not talk about these issues. Yet Baladuri, who worked for the Abbasids, included it in his history. Then he says, فَإِنْ يَكُنْ مَا نَحْنُ فِيهِ صَوَابًا. And if in what was done by the earlier people was good, then the first one takes all the thawab. And remember who Muhammad's father is. Then he says, فَإِنْ يَكُ جَوْرًا. But if it is jawr and tyranny, then those people, that person of the past, the first one, أَسَّسُهُ وَنَحْنُ شُرَكَاؤُهُ. Then he set the foundation and we're just his partners. See how he does it 2 ways? He says one way, Muawiyah says, if it is good, then we are, we're okay. The thawab goes to the first one. If it's bad, then we're just participating in the company line. See, Muawiyah always finds a way to get out. But this is where mu'mineen, if your intellect is sharp, your aql is there, and the lights are on, and not nobody's home, somebody is home. Not lights on, nobody's home. Lights on and somebody has to be home. Because if nobody's home and now we're just on autopilot with our deen, and we start hearing things like this, we start thinking, wow, Muawiyah, man, this guy makes sense. Because he's just following what the previous people did. Like, give him a break. But then obviously we read in Ziyarat Ashura, فَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً أَسَّسَتْ أَسَاسَ الظُّلْمُ الْجَوْرِ عَلَيْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْبَيْتِ. Oh Allah, remove your mercy from the community that set the foundations of dhulm and jawr. Whoever that is, it is. Let them remain unnamed. Mu'mineen can do their own research. But Shiism, Tashayyu, Madhab Ahlul Bayt is very clear. How do I explain this, my dear brothers and sisters? There are 2 visions of Islam, 2 different ways of thinking, fikr. One fikr kind of says the past is the past, forget it, leave it, turku, leave it. It doesn't matter who did what, who didn't do what. Just love Allah, pray, inshallah Allah will forgive you. Now Madhab Ahlul Bayt says no, because justice should also be on earth, not only in heaven. There should be some adala on earth. There should be some justice in earth. There should be some truth on the earth. It is not enough to just say, Allah forgive, Allahumma, may Allah forgive everyone. Jami'an. No. Madhab Ahlul Bayt says no. If wrongs were done, dhulm was done, jawr was done, then people must be held accountable. This is the lesson we learned from Ziyarat Ashura. Then he says, وَبِهُدَاهُ أخذنا وبفعله اقتدينا. And we were guided with his hidayah and his guidance. And we followed him and imitated him. So this is the words of Muawiyah to Muhammad. Now what would happen to Muhammad? What a story, my dear brothers and sisters. I hope you know what happens now. If we are lovers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, then this should be in our hearts. At some point, Amir al-Mu'mineen decided to replace Muhammad with Malik al-Ashtar as the governor of Egypt. We're all Shia, we know this history. This is our history of Madhab Ahlul Bayt. As Muhammad is leaving from Egypt, Muawiyah sent Amr bin As to Egypt. Why? Because Muawiyah was always mad at Muhammad. He accused Muhammad of creating problems earlier, and Muhammad was a thorn in the side of Muawiyah. Muawiyah had no salam and peace as long as Muhammad was hayya. This is the awlad of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When there's dhalimeen, they are standing strong. And Muawiyah knew this. So Muawiyah sent Amr bin As to Egypt. Do you want to know what they did to him? I'll read you exactly what they did according to the history books. They executed him. عن حز محمد بن أبي بكر فدخل في الخربة فيها حمار ميت فدخل في جوفه فأحرق في جوف الحمار. They killed Muhammad, executed him, put him in a garbage dump, stuffed him into a dead donkey, and then lit the donkey on fire. This is what they did to Muhammad. This is what was done to the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is what was done to those who stand up against Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah. So what we see in Karbala, as I narrated to you yesterday, Abdullah bin Muslim, as is narrated by Ibn Athir in his Kamil, what did they do to him? They burnt him. So this Umayyad tradition of this kind of violence and jawr and dhulm and murder was not new before Karbala. It was not something new in Karbala, rather. They were already following in the practice of what Muawiyah and them were used to doing, Banu Umayyah was used to. Now, do you want to know what Ali says? When the news, or rather first Asma bint Umays, the riwayah tells us, Anna Asma bint Umays lamma ataha na'i Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. When the na'i of Muhammad bin Abi Bakr came to Asma bint Umays, look at this woman, mu'mina, salihah, sabira. The riwayah says, يعني ما صنع بي كظمت حزنها. She held back her tears. وقامت إلى مسجدها. And she went into her masjid where she prays. وشخبت دما. Until her blood flowed with huzn and sadness. What kind of mother is this, my dear brothers and sisters? Look at these ummahat of Karbala or the mother of Muhammad. We must honor these women. Look at their sabr. She went into her masjid and she let her huzn flow through her blood. Through dua, meaning. Through communicating with Allah Azza wa Jal. How many mothers do you know would treat the murder and burning of their son in this way? This is Asma bint Umays, the wife of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And when the news came to Amir al-Mu'mineen, take your hearts to Amir al-Mu'mineen tonight. When the news was brought to Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen wrote a letter to Abdullah ibn Abbas, which is in letter number 35 of Nahjul Balagha. In this letter, it is one of the most beautiful eulogies and ta'ziyah that is ever found. Ibn al-Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili says in his commentary on Nahjul Balagha. Because every line ends in the mansub tense, in the fatha tense. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I won't go through all of the Arabic, I don't want to prolong. He says that Egypt was conquered. Muhammad bin Abi Bakr was martyred. Istushhida. فَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ نَحْتَسِبُهُ. That we take our grievances to Allah. We are patient with Allah. Now, how does he describe Muhammad? My dear brothers, remember this and ask yourself a question. When we die, will our Imam describe us with these attributes? وَلَدًا نَاصِحًا عَامِلًا كَادِحًا سَيْفًا قَاطِعًا وَرُكُنًا دَافِعًا. Muhammad was a son to me, he says, a sincere, devoted son. Does he say my adopted son, my foster son, Asma bint Umays' son? No. وَلَدًا نَاصِحًا. يعني كان لي ولدا ناصحا. He was my devoted son. عاملا كادحا. Tirelessly working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. سيفا قاطعا. His sword was very sharp. And he was my backbone. ركنا دافعا. Who is Amir al-Mu'mineen? Imam al-Muttaqeen, commander of the faithful, is saying Muhammad was my backbone. Now when we read in Karbala, what did Imam al-Hussein say about Abi Fadl al-Abbas? Al-an inkasarat dhahri wa qallat hilati. Can't we make a comparison between Muhammad to Amir al-Mu'mineen and Abbas to Hussein? Just in their own words. Yes. And how many of us know about this? Inshallah we do. These are not simple words, my dear brothers and sisters. For Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqeen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salamullahi alayhi, to use these kinds of attributes about somebody means this person is guaranteed paradise. Amilan kadiha. He then says to Abdullah bin Abbas in his letter, he says, Da'awtuhum sirran wa jahra. I called upon these people in private and in public. I invited them to haqq. Some of them betrayed us, others listened, others disliked us. فَمِنْهُمَ الْآتِيَ كَارِحًا وَمِنْهُمَ الْمُعْتَلْ كَاذِبًا وَمِنْهُمَ الْقَائِدْ خَاذِلًا. The words are so beautiful, what Amir al-Mu'mineen says. وَأَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى أَنْ يَجْعَلَ لِي مِنْهُمْ فَرَجًا عَاجِلًا. And I ask Allah to give me farajan ajila now. The heart of Amir al-Mu'mineen was broken. This was a tragedy before Karbala. Now let us get to the third son, Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam. It is narrated that on the day of Ashura, the thirst was absolutely intense. Many had already gone. Habib was gone, Muslim was gone, Muslim bin Awsaja. Zuhair was gone. Hussein is now left with Bani Hashim. The swords were sharpened for war, and all, as I said last night, the thirst was intense. Al-atash, al-atash, al-atash. But Abu Abdullah had to make some choices on this day. As we read, of course, Ali ibn Hussein, Ali al-Akbar, had the might of Hamza, the bravery of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the beauty and the jamal of the Prophet. What a combination in one person. The might of Hamza, the shuja'at of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the jamal and the beauty of Rasulullah himself. What a combination, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What a combination of sifat in one person. This young boy was the light of Bani Hashim. Yet the riwayat tell us that he was the first from Bani Hashim to go to fight. Look at the example that Amir al-Mu'mineen is teaching. That it is not fair for him to ask Imam Hassan's son to be sacrificed, or the other sons of Bani Hashim, but not his own son. Amir al-Mu'mineen, or rather Imam al-Hussein, afwan, did not protest when Ali al-Akbar requested idhn to go out to fight. He allowed him to go. In fact, we also read that Umar ibn Sa'd offered peace and silm to Ali al-Akbar. Do you know why? Because Layla, his mother, was connected in qaraba with Bani Umayyah. Of course, Ali al-Akbar refused. And we read in Ziyarat al-Nahiya, Assalamu alayka ya awwala qatilan min nasli khayri salil. That peace be upon you, O the first one who was killed from that pure progeny. Min sulalati Ibrahim al-Khalil. Nevertheless, it is narrated that when it was time for Ali al-Akbar to go out to fight, Abu Abdullah did not show any hesitation. Ali Akbar looked at his father, Imam al-Hussein, وَأَرْخَى عَيْنَيْ بِالْدُمُوعِ, and his eyes began filling with tears. And he says, Allahumma ashhadu ala ha'ula'i al-qawm. Imam al-Hussein begins to make a dua that I testify, O Allah, against these people. قَدْ بَرَّزَ إِلَيْهِمْ غُلَامٌ أَشْبَحُ النَّاسِ أَشْبَحَ النَّاسِ خَلْقًا وَخُلُقًا. And we know all of this, that I'm sending someone who looks the most like Rasulullah in both his character and his beauty and his looks. So, O Allah, Allahumma, O Allah, deny them the barakat of this earth, the blessings of this earth. O Allah, tear them up one by one. For they called upon us to help us, and they turned around us to kill us. Imam felt this sense of khiyana in his heart, this sense of betrayal in his heart. All the ashab were gone. And all you could hear from the women was, Irham ala ghurbatina, Irham ala ghurbatina. Have mercy upon our estrangement. They started going to Ali al-Akbar, La tasta'jil, don't go too fast, don't go too fast. But he had to go. And he goes out to fight into the battlefield. And we know the poem that he recited. It was just recited. Ana Ali ibn Hussein, that I am Ali, the son of Hussein ibn Ali. That we are from the house of Allah, the Bayt of the Nabi. He goes out to fight. The riwayat state that Abu Abdullah began to cry as Ali al-Akbar went out to fight. He began to cry. And he started shouting at Umar ibn Sa'd, what is wrong with you? May Allah cut off your lineage as you have cut off mine. May Allah send someone to slay you in your bed as you have sent someone to kill one of my children. Inna Allah istafa Adam wa Nuhan wa ala Ibrahim wa ala Imran ala al-alamin dhurriyatal ba'duha min ba'd wallahu sami'un alim. Imam begins reciting this from the Quran. Ali al-Akbar continues to fight from the right flank to the left flank. He kills 120 men. But now the thirst was killing him. The thirst was exhausting him. He rides back to his father. ثم رجع إلى أبيه. And he had جراحات كثيرة. He had many injuries all over his body. And he told his father, يا أبا العطش قد قتلني والثقل الحديد أجحدني. And the weight of the iron is overcoming me. This thirst is too much for me. فهل إلى شربة min ma'in sabil. Is there any way for me to get water now? What was Imam Hussein to do? فَبَكَى الْحُسَيْن. Hussein begins to cry. He says, Bunayya, you will meet your grandfather Rasulullah very soon. You will drink from the hand of Rasulullah. Bunayya hati lisanik. Give me your tongue. Imam takes his ring off. He puts his ring into the mouth of Ali al-Akbar. Ali Akbar now charges out like a lion. His father is trying to keep watch of him. With each blow, Imam al-Hussein is trying to see what will transpire. Ali al-Akbar managed to kill another 80 enemies. The heart of Abu Abdullah must have been beating. And he says, war has confronted us with these realities. Ali al-Akbar fought 200 men. They then fired an arrow and it landed in his throat. He put his hand over his throat to stop the bleeding. What was he to do? Then Munqidh bin Murra al-Abdi hit Ali al-Akbar on the head. Ali al-Akbar's ras and his head is now bleeding. ثم ta'anu. And then he was stabbed fi dhahri, and he was stabbed in his back. وَضَرَبُوا النَّاسُ بِأَسْيَافِهِمْ. And then the people started cutting him with their swords, one after the other. You could imagine his screams, بِلِسَانِ الْحَالِ. يَا أَبَتَا يَا أَبَتَا يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ مِنِّي السَّلَامِ يَا أَبَتَا. Upon you be peace, O my father. Imagine this scene. هذا جدي رسول الله. He says, this is my grandfather Rasulullah giving me water finally. He is coming to me quickly. Abu al-Faraj al-Isfahani relates that as he was on the ground, they continued to fire arrows into his body. One after the other, one after the other. Ali Akbar is off his horse. Hussein races out into the battlefield. قَطَعُوهُ بِأَسْيَافِهِمْ. Irban, Irban. They're just continuing to stab him and to cut him. Imam al-Hussein finally reaches his body. Waladi, Waladi Ali, Waladi Ali. Ya Husseina. He put his cheek onto the cheek of Ali. قتل الله قوم قتلوك يا بنيا. May Allah kill those who killed you. على الدنيا بعدك العفا. That this world has no meaning after you. Wa Husseina. He says, hard it is upon your grandfather and father that they could not respond to you when you called upon them. That they could not help you when you called upon them. Think of their helplessness. Think of the wahda and the ghurba of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Hamid bin Muslim then narrates, brothers, that a woman comes running out of the tent. She was shining like the sun, and she said, Wa Habiba wa thamarata fuada wa nura aina. Hamid bin Muslim asked, Man hadi al-imra? Who is this imra? فقال هذا زينب. هذه زينب بنت علي سلام الله عليها. This is Zainab bint Ali. She has come out of her tent. And the historians tell us that as Zainab was crying, Imam al-Hussein was silent. The entire tent was silent. Zainab now throws her body onto the body of Ali al-Akbar. Hussein takes Zainab's hand. Why, Mama? He takes her hand. He takes her back to the tent. Imam al-Hussein now asks two young boys to take the body of Ali Akbar to a special tent. But brothers, shall I narrate to you what happened now? أخذ رأسه ووضعه في هجري. Hamid narrates that he takes the head of Ali Akbar and he puts it into his lap. And he says, لعن الله قاتلك. May Allah's la'na be on your killer. Ya waladi, you are now relieved of the gham and the ham of dunya. But brothers, then a little girl دخلت في الفسطاط. من هذه البنت؟ سكينة بنت الحسين عليه السلام. She comes into the tent and she says, يا بابا يابا أين علي? Where is Ali? This is narrated by Alamat al-Zanjani and all some historians. Sukaina asks Imam al-Hussein, أين أخي علي? فنظر إليها الحسين. Hussein looks at her. وكان صامتا. He had no words. He just said, صبرا صبرا. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. معتم الحسين سلام الله عليه